you determine if the evidence that you're looking at, the research, is legitimate?
Okay, that's a good question. So, yeah, I want to be careful about how I answer that. So, they say, like with anything, including with grammar, you need to know the rules so that you can break them. So,
okay, I love it.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to do here with how we look at literature and how we can be a little more flexible and artful with it. So, first, it's important to know what the rules are for quality. So, we would look at quite a few things. We would look at, who published it, what's the impact factor of the journal, so how often cited is it, where the author's from, was it peer reviewed, is there any conflict of interest. Then we're going to look at what is the research design. Is it appropriate for the question, which is it's my favorite question to ask first when I'm reading something, and you'd be amazed at how often the answer is no. the research question, totally inappropriate design to answer that question, game over. This is a terrible step. And then if they did, pick the appropriate design, did they apply methods that are appropriate for that design? And that's all written down. That's not something that you or I need to come up with. There are checklists for that sort of thing. So, so that's a little bit of a checklist exercise that, in terms of the rules of research quality, you could feed it pretty much into a computer and it would be able to tell you, it would be able to give you a number that I wouldn't strongly disagree with it one way or another. But that's sort of that's if we're pretending that research is objective and that we're pretending that people who are participating in research don't affect the results, which we know is not true. And also, even unfortunately, in the 1990s, we had the beginning of the evidence-based medicine movement, which was a really excellent idea and model for how to improve certain problems with conventional healthcare. So is it okay if I give a little background on that? Because I think it's really important to understand about how we decide what research is good. So, the main problems were that, doctors would train, I'm going to give an example. So a doctor would train, let's say, and maybe they've been in practice for 30 years and they're a very well-loved doctor and they're a good doctor. And they're kind of recommending treatments just based on how they were trained 30 years ago and what they've seen worked well with their patients. And they may be completely unaware of what studies have been done that maybe completely contradict either the safety or the effectiveness of what they're recommending. And also, this is before we had these reviews that were kind of looking at research together. So no doctor has time to read all of the randomized controlled trials anyways. So we had all this research, but doctors most of the time probably were just not applying it. So patients were not getting the best that science had to offer for medicine. And that's where the evidence-based medicine movement came from. There was a seminal paper published in 1994 that laid it out, and it said, look, evidence-based medicine is going to look at reviews of all of the trials around a subject together, and it's going to be based on the doctor's experience and the patient's worldview. Okay. So we're going to put those three things together, and we're going to give good medicine, and that's a fantastic model for excellent medicine. Problem is that the pharmaceutical industry, being as efficient and large as it is, saw an opportunity there and completely hijacked it. So they started churning out research, just garbage research often, withholding negative studies, pumping out positive studies. There's one particular area that I'm a little bit focused on because it really drives me nuts, which is Botox for migraines, which is just one of those really unethical things. And there was a 2-arm study that was done in 2015. And the last I checked, which is a while ago, they made like 35 publications based on that one study. So if you were to search for it, it would look like there have been loads of research done. But they just keep milking publications out of this one data set. So they do these things. And so unfortunately, the evidence base at large is very distorted. It's really impacted by things other than what are the most pressing health issues for patients. Medical solutions, who's funding it, It's just, it's been distorted. So unfortunately, it's you can't rely on the published literature, and you can't just go in blind and wonder what you're going to find, because it's been completely manipulated. So having said all of that, my perspective is I'm involved in evidence-based advocacy. I'm not unbiased. My bias is that, first of all, based on the literature, the evidence-based literature, for many conditions, patients would be better off going to a shaman or a witch doctor than going to a conventional doctor, because the treatments are not effective and dangerous for a lot of things. So you're better off, I don't know, burying a statue, if that's the case. And so therefore my bias is that then if you have acupuncture, which is a treatment that's been used and refined and studied over a very long time, the worst thing that anybody says about it is that it's an extraordinarily effective placebo. Like, that's the worst that gets slung at us, is that it seems to, banish migraines much better than medication, and it's just a placebo.
And very quickly. Right?
Yes. So that's what our critics are saying. People who are looking at the literature more objectively are seeing that it works for a lot of things, and we know on a cellular level it's improving self-regulation. So my bias is that if we're talking about not an emergency and a condition for which conventional medicine has a poor effectiveness to safety profile, patients would be better off starting with acupuncture and only moving to more invasive treatments as they needed to, which I feel like is common sense. So therefore, and I'm just being completely honest, I use the literature to tell that story. So so I know the rules in order to break them. I feel that the evidence-based around medicine has been completely corrupted. And it's not just me saying that, that is the finest academic scholars on the planet say that. That's where I'm getting it from. So, so I'm just reading.
Which is incredible. And let me just ask you this. Who are the finest academic scholars?
Well, sure. So, I'm talking about, Ionitis is one. He first published a very well often cited and well-read study that demonstrated that over half of trials were false, that their conclusions were false. And he's done a lot of additional research on that as well. And I believe he's based at Harvard. I know he's originally from Greece. But it's people who are, so most medical research is industry funded. That means that the pharmaceutical industries that are selling the drug are doing the research. And we also know that funding affects the results. So it affects it in the design.
Or they just don't put out the studies they don't like.
They don't put out the studies they don't like, but they really select and manipulate who gets included in the studies to make things look better. So it doesn't represent, so what the people in the study do not represent you who might get the drug. And so it's people who are there might be biostatisticians, or there might be other types of researchers who are standing outside evaluating the research. And they're the ones, and they're not,
They have no, what would be the term? They have no skin in the game.
No skin in the game. They're not, and a skeptic would argue, well, they're making their name based on doing that. So, but no, that's ridiculous. They have no skin in the game. They're asking very reasonable questions, and the data is showing this. And frankly, based on the questions that they're asking, how they're answering them, and what the answers are, there's no reasonable refutation of that. It's just not, it's not tenable. It's not, it is not controversial in the research literature that research funding affects results. Like, there isn't another side to that. There isn't any study that shows the opposite. And frankly, that's what we'd expect, because that's human nature. So we're not kind of conspiracy theorists. We're not, I'm not angry. It is one of those things. And so, and I feel like this is a little bit more obvious in other parts of the world where the medical, the pharmaceutical industry is smaller, that a lot of people don't want to jump to something invasive or pharmaceutical if it's not an emergency, and they don't need to. That's just the reason.
Companies have so much money. They have so much money. Yeah,
they do. Here's, as one example, and this was cited in the recent review that I did. I think they've been, actually, I'm gonna make up the exact number. They've been fined over, I think, a couple of $1 billion in less than a decade for just unethical practices around research. I mean, that's one. So again, there are institutions finding them and winning. So they are breaking rules.
And I bet you most people don't know that.
I bet most people don't know that. And the truth is, it's not my desire to get people angry about pharmaceuticals or to run around saying you shouldn't do this. But it's, for the people, for us and the people that come for our care, we can be, we need to be mature adults and give good advice. And frankly, if I have a patient whose worldview is that conventional medicine is great, I'm not going to start arguing with them about that. It's that's counterproductive. But if somebody is feeling like they want to go in a certain direction, they want to know what the evidence shows, I can very happily and calmly educate them from that perspective. And it's one that I really hope that more of us become aware of. And I think that once we are, then as acupuncturists doing a very safe and effective treatment, we can feel more confident when we show up to work going, there is a lot of non-specific effects. There are a lot of specific effects. And sometimes we know that's a patient who doesn't need a knee surgery that's been shown to be ineffective, or that's a patient.
Spinal fusion. I've actually treated more than one of my patients who have not done well with those.
No, not done well, and it wasn't indicated. And as again, I'll repeat it. It makes it's self-evident that we want to go start with the treatment that has the best effectiveness to safety ratio, and then move up the invasiveness ladder as needed. So even if it's a placebo, which all treatments have placebo effects. So again, that's part of being human. Humans, go back to language and meaning. We are deeply context-driven people, and no more so than when we're in pain or we have health problems. So I mean, and that's again, there's no refuting that,